I'd just like to analogize something here. If we didn't have the gas stations as spread out as they are, gas vehicles would not be as economical for us either. So the infrastructure is key. Our concept is to try and utilize our numerous hubs as battery interchange or charging facilities. One of the challenges we're seeing right now is long haul across province does not quite work for electric vehicles, last mile, urban environment, all that is great.
We got to be very situational when it comes to ESG. For example, our mayor here in Montreal is very focused on the environment, just a few streets away from here in St. Catherine, McGill University. You can't deliver packages like we once did in the past. So finding different means and alternatives of how we're delivering to those areas, potentially with e-cargo bikes that are more efficient, but yet don't require the same type of capital, is all different alternatives that we're looking at. So it's been a continuous improvement journey for us, no question.
Amazon is really driving a lot of the volume, but also a lot of the expectations. Our projections show that e-commerce is going to be somewhere in and around 22% of overall retail sales by 2030 at minimum, based on the projections that we see today. And the forecast is Amazon is going to be about 50% of that. So a huge, huge portion. And they've really raised consumer expectations, but not always in a cost-effective way, unfortunately, for all carriers. So Amazon, because of the volume that they have, because of the network that they've built, can actually handle some of those expectations quite well. And they're testing some new things, and often at a loss at first to break through the market. So what we're seeing is Amazon has pushed the expectations of free delivery same day, free delivery next day. Reality is that costs money to a retailer. And same for returns. So returns is free with Amazon. They're even pushing now for a return without a box, without a label, and they'll pick it up at your home. So they're testing new models, pushing the boundaries of traditional carriers, but also the smaller retailers. So how do we make sure that we balance our portfolio so that it's well-rounded and that we make sure that we can actually support those businesses that don't have the buying power and the logistics capacity of the big giants?
Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm a senior executive on call, helping businesses in the make, move, sell flow of consumer goods and services. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available through my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check it out. As the business world faces much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, organizations need to be tapping into resources with an inside edge on transitioning their teams to be agile, innovative, and digital, with thought leaders, experts, and senior executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations to help reorientate their enterprises. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm the moderator for this session. It's all about e-commerce. I'm a senior exec on call, or an interim executive, specializing in rapid performance improvement across retail supply chains and last mile. I spent most of my career in that area. Can I introduce three of our panelists? Inam Shah, who's the CEO and co-founder of JoeyCo. Okay. I hope I pronounced this right, Fabrizio Colizza. Yeah, thank you. Who's Senior Director, Sales in Retail, representing Purolator, and Valerie Normand, Director of Product Development, Consumer Products and Experiences at Canada Post. So we've got a good chunk of how we've been handling e-commerce within Canada represented right here. So this session is about the e-commerce. What did we learn? And how do we manage accelerating uncertainty? What we're going to see in the future, over the next 2 years, is going to make 2020 look like a cakewalk. So my agenda here is to ask 4 areas and for the panelists to share their perspectives and insights around adaptability during uncertainty, unit economics of e-commerce, ESG, and the last mile. It's quite a critical area. And finally, and it's probably of wider appeal, not just in the last mile and e-commerce, but attracting and retaining staff in today's environment. And we saw some quite scary figures this morning, certainly in food service, the massive gap in employment. And we're going to finish off a question and answer session. To set the scene in terms of adaptability and uncertainty, consumers changed their behaviors quite quickly. When we went into the first set of restrictions, they quickly changed their category spending, how they shopped. They shopped online more than they ever did. If they didn't shop online before, they found a way of doing that. And that manifested itself in massive shifts in volume within our supply chains. E-commerce, which was typically about 2.5% to 3% of total retail sales, grew very quickly to 15 to 17%. And the sad news is, as I found out in last month's figures, that it's actually crept down to 5% of total retail sales. There was some rumor that it would go up and it would stabilize it and it would resume its normal path. It's actually gone up and started to head back down to its natural growth rate, despite the commentary about a massive acceleration of many trends. And uncertainty continues. I can't point to exactly where that uncertainty is because the last 2 years have been full of uncertainty and we have raging inflation. I think we have a very deep seated problem with how we've responded to inflation so far. So the questions I want to ask the panel, and I'll probably kick off with Valerie first, is I'm going to bunch these together and ask Valerie, Fab and Inam, just give us a couple of minutes on each of these areas. Can you share a couple of learning experiences that your companies had, you had as individuals about what the pandemic did to your role and how your organization responded? How are you continuing to invest in adaptability? Because we need to continue to do that, I believe. And over the last 2 years, have your business models actually changed? And how have they changed in the face of this uncertainty that is likely to continue to rise? Valerie.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I want to say that the pandemic truly brought a huge increase in volume. So we saw the volumes of about 5 years worth in 2 years. Canada Post, as a company, was already handling a big bulk of the packages that were being shipped from business to consumers mainly. What this led to, though, is a complete bottleneck in our network. So we really were not ready for that type of volume that quickly. We were at the time in the process of building a plant, a second plant in Toronto, because that was kind of the main piece of the bottleneck, but it wasn't ready. In facing the pandemic, we prioritized the health and safety of our team members because we needed to handle now double the volume that we handled almost on a daily basis, which was close to 2 million packages a day, with a staff reduction of about half to a third, just given the type of layout that we had in our facilities. So if you think of a sorting facility or sorting plant, we have 2 people side by side or even across from one another, now needing to be 6 feet apart and making sure that we had the right precautions to make sure that we weren't contaminating one another. And we really saw how essential our services were. In addition to that, we've had, as I'm sure most of you in the room, instances where there was COVID outbreaks in facilities. So when we've had COVID outbreaks in Toronto, where 70% of our volume flows through, we really became the bottleneck and actually needed to make a conscious decision, unfortunately, to turn away customers. And I know some of my peers have actually benefited from this shift that we needed to do as an enterprise, but we needed opportunity to be able to breathe and make sure that the safety of employees remained first. So what we really learned from that is that, first of all, you can't plan for the unexpected, but we need to be a lot more nimble. Canada Post is a 150-year-old company. it's a dinosaur. So we needed to adapt very quickly to this changing environment. And we weren't at the time really ready to adapt on a limb like this. So even the technology side of things for the remote workers, the first few days, we still had just archaic conference lines that were getting a busy signal when we were trying to do a conference call with our peers. So we evolved quite a lot from that. We've invested significantly in technology and automation, but also really focused on the care and the health and the well-being of employees. And I know we're going to touch on that a little bit later, so I won't go too far into it, but both the physical health as well as the mental health, because the pressures that our operations were feeling, and I'm sure a lot of your members were feeling as well, is it's the backbone of the economy and it needed to continue to operate even in the most critical times. So a big shift for Canada Post, and definitely a lot of lesson learned in becoming a lot more proactive and agile when we see things trending and changing in the market.
Thanks, Valerie. And thanks for a lot of those volumes, because a lot of those volumes came our way up here later. So 2 key learnings for us. The first one was around this notion of holding on to contingency capacity. I think for all the carriers in the room that held on to contingency capacity prior to the pandemic, you got to benefit from that with offering your customers world-class service levels and really supporting the growth that we experienced during COVID. The second one for us was this notion of portfolio optimization. We all looked at the results. Stats Canada recently posted e-commerce sales the first quarter of the year, and e-commerce sales dropped 23%. So the importance of optimizing our portfolio outside of just e-commerce and shipments to the home and B2B sectors, for example, in sectors that ship the big and bulky items, and as well as non-retail sectors that ship into the home, for example, home healthcare, industrial. Diversifying our portfolio is key, specifically as we're getting out of the pandemic. So those were a few key learnings for us. And, we've adopted a culture of planning to be disrupted and overwhelmed. And if you integrate some of those principles in your game plan, you can manage lots of growth because of it. So those would be 2 ideas. Back to Valerie.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Val. Thanks, Fab. And thank you, CITT staff, for putting this event together. And thanks for the invite. In terms of the challenges that we saw during the pandemic. So as JoeyCo, our primary mandate 10 years ago was to start developing technology, algorithms, and trying to bridge the gap that we see with traditional carriers. The fact that Val and Fab's organizations have made hefty investments into technology, and we can all see e-commerce is sort of carrying that mantle, and technology is going to be required further. I think what we've developed over the past 10 years was a solution for the challenges that we saw during the pandemic. One was labor. Our company's called JoeyCo. We wanted to brand it, keep it courier-centric. Our focus was always around the courier, a lot like, as Val mentioned, the people aspect and their safety while they're working, but more importantly, are they being rewarded well on a timely manner? Do they have the right incentives in place? What's the retention rate like? All those really mattered to us. So during the pandemic period, we were working with a lot of our clients that needed quite significant uptick in overall labor, overall fulfillment capacities to be able to get packages across borders with issues crossing borders and having ample staff to load and unload the vehicles. So with JoeyCo, we were able to quickly send out a notification to our database of users and start onboarding and training them. So I'd like to highlight that with virtual online technologies, we're able to scale quicker than the traditional guys, primarily because we were building up a database and conditioning it specifically for the purpose of coming in and filling in the gaps where they weren't traditionally employed on a long-term contract or anything of that sort. Just prior to the pandemic, we were exploring options on how to increase on-demand delivery solutions. On-demand on its own is a completely different world altogether as compared to traditional next day or 2-day shipments. And the reason for that is you've got to find the right carrier, the right supplier at the right time. So coming from that world and having to assimilate and adapt and basically conform to what the market needed at that point, we were quick to be able to bring our solutions to our clients, where they were able to put up new service offerings such as on-demand or next day. You would have couriers that are trained, incentivized in the right ways, and positioned strategically so that they could fulfill these orders. A lot of the deliveries that we started seeing during the pandemic were primarily groceries. As you could imagine, during the lockdown, not many people were able to walk into their regular grocery stores and get those deliveries done. That's where we came in with our technology solutions to be able to broker the right carriers with the right clients and the right end users to get those jobs done. So we saw an uptick in different types of delivery transactions, not just retail, but even in terms of services, we've seen some new business models come up. So not so much a challenge, but an opportunity that was uncovered through the pandemic as well. So I think those were our primary learnings from the pandemic, and we're looking forward to what this post-pandemic period has for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, looking at the unit economics of e-commerce, we saw that the changing consumer behavior made major changes in logistics, and it was in the background of Amazon upgrading its own service from typically 2 days or more to next day, and for some products from next day to same day. They got off to a bumpy start at the start of the pandemic, but they started to move that into position. And it sent retailers into a bit of a mad scramble because they didn't have a very good alternative to compete on. So it drove many into the hands of Instacart, DoorDash, Uber Eats to try and push forward and get into same-day service, which many of them did quite successfully. It also commercially put them in a difficult position because to attract traffic, which had been lost from the stores back into their brand through the e-commerce channel, they often found themselves having to provide home delivery free, worse, returns free. Now, just to put this in some kind of context, for e-commerce compared to stores, if we think about returns to stores, if people walk into the stores, they present the product, you have that interesting discussion, and finally you get your money back. That ratio of total sales is about a 10% rate. When we look at e-commerce, it's generally, in average, about 30%. So if e-commerce is much more costly to perform for a retailer, and then you've got the burden of 30% of what you send out is likely to come back, that makes it for, I would say, a very challenging situation altogether. So the questions I want to ask of the panel are, how have you as operators been managing speed, accuracy, and on time efficiently? Because it's easy to do all those things, but you have to still operate efficiently. And how have operations and networks been perhaps re-engineered for greater productivity? And for the reverse logistics, because it'd be interesting to get some insights here, if you were involved in reverse logistics, and I think you all were, how did you scale the operation? And importantly, what did you conclude from your learnings around reverse logistics?
A great question. Let me start off with how consumers' behaviors really started to dictate how we as operators need to service them. So we saw a lot of higher ticket items, higher value items coming through. We saw a lot of recurring deliveries coming through as well. One of the ways that we needed to manage this better was to get a complete understanding of the landscape that we're operating in. So the geographical terrain, all the dwellings that exist within that region, and exactly how to get there, right? So how to navigate there using the type of vehicle. So we basically built up our own database and ran all the permutations across it and just wait for one of those orders to come through. And we know this is going to be the fastest way to get there based on the tests that we've run. So that's just in terms of turn-by-turn routing, turn-by-turn navigation, and sorting and routing packages out for delivery. We saw great improvements from off-the-shelf tech solutions in that space as well to be able to get better time estimates over to the customer. So it wasn't just about speed, it was about transparency, predictability, knowing when the packages would arrive, That's where we as operators needed to make some changes to conform to what the consumers are looking for. And then obviously with speed, it came down to just having more capacity. At the end of the day, volume is what everybody is aiming for, but density is the true winner here. And that's what our technology or the systems that we put in place. We're always looking at finding the most optimal routes. And that is our bet in answering the question of getting the products over quicker to the carriers. And by having that gig economy network, we could scale up or scale down in any region fairly quickly.
For us, in terms of speed, we worked essentially around asset utilization. Our industry for the longest time, we start our sortation programs very early in the morning. We finish sorting at around 8:30, and then there's this first wave of deliveries. So what we did during the pandemic is we used our assets differently, right? We integrated multiple waves into our overall operations. For example, there's lots of downtimes in our industry between 9 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So we leveraged that downtime, essentially forwarded same-day volumes into our facilities between 9 and 2 o'clock, integrated a second wave of same-day deliveries, and essentially got into the same-day business. From there, we went from overnight to same-day and really, scaled that 7 days a week and provided consumers with a 7-day service, including same-day. So that's really how we managed the speed cost effectively through asset utilization primarily. The second thing was a lot of support and investment on what Inam was talking about, specifically around sort logic. A lot of our hubs, our new hub in Toronto, our new hub in Montreal, we built sortation programs directly from our conveyors that sorts the programs either in our same-day network or next-day network going into the weekends, and we could bypass operations across the country directly into our facilities, and not only into the facility at the end delivery room. So there was a lot of programming, both from an operational efficiency perspective, but also getting into the same day business with a lot of speed and effectiveness.
I'm going to take things a little bit differently. So I'm going to share some of the insights that we have done just in terms of research and projections that we see. You talked about the Amazon effect. You talked about consumer expectations and where they're at. So Amazon is really driving, of course, as you all know, a lot of the retail focus, a lot of the volume, but also a lot of the expectations. So our projections show that e-commerce is going to be somewhere in and around 22% of overall retail sales by 2030 at minimum, based on the projections that we see today. And the forecast is that actually Amazon is going to be about 50% of that. So a huge, huge portion. And they've really raised consumer expectations, but not always in a cost-effective way, unfortunately, for all carriers. So Amazon, because of the volume that they have, because of the network that they've built, can actually handle some of those expectations quite well. And they're testing some new things, and often at a loss at first, just to kind of break through the market. So what we're seeing is Amazon has pushed, of course, the expectations of free delivery same day, free delivery next day. Reality is that costs money to a retailer. And same for returns. So returns is free with Amazon. They're even pushing now for a return without a box, without a label, and they'll pick it up at your home. So they're testing new models, which are pushing the boundaries of definitely the traditional carriers, but also the smaller retailers. So how do we support, I don't want to say everyone else but Amazon, because of course Amazon is still a key player. But I talked a little bit about some of the pushing back on some customers, Amazon being one of them, because the way that we were operating with Amazon was almost at a loss for Canada Post. So how do we make room for small, medium businesses? How do we support small, medium businesses? How do we help them with logistics, reverse logistics? How do we help them compete with the beast that Amazon will be? How do we make sure that we have room in our network and capacity to support them so that we don't have 150 tractor trailers, which we did in the pandemic, of Amazon's returns just clogging our network because Amazon couldn't take them back. So how do we make sure that we balance our portfolio so that it's well-rounded and that we make sure that we can actually support those businesses that don't have the buying power and the logistics capacity of the big giants? So how do we make sure that we price the products and we price the service accordingly? Does that mean that everybody can compete with same day? No, potentially not. But how can we make next day affordable, especially when you look at remote rural areas, which are obviously underserved? So some of those untraditional carriers really kind of focus on that dense urban core, which you can have that optimal service. But what about everybody else, right? It's an interesting shift. We're going to see a lot of change as well. And we've seen a big change in the pandemic. So consumers were home to receive their package. Well, that may not be the case as much next year or even in 2 years from now. What is the new normal? Nobody knows what the new normal will be. So how do we make sure that we are ready and adapt and look at all the different scenarios to support not just the big driving factor of Amazon, but also the small, medium businesses in the country.
Just one more note real quick. I definitely second that Amazon operate like a sovereign nation and have absolutely plowed through a lot of markets. One of the things we need to note here is logistics is just a cost item for them. It's just a line item cost. Logistics is our top line item. So is it an unfair advantage? I think so. But at the same time, I think other retailers and other brands are catching on to direct fulfillment, omni-channel, direct to consumer, and building that brand up. Something we've been focusing on for the past 5 or 6 years is how do we get the SMBs or the SMEs the same type of capacities that Amazon has, or is it just that Amazon's going to soak everything up and drown everyone out? So we had a brief article on that back in 2014 in Globe and Mail addressing that issue specifically, that we need technology, we need more fulfillment options for SMBs to be able to compete with the likes of Amazon, not just be pigeonholed in one marketplace or the other.
I wonder when Amazon realized to get to critical mass, they actually have to sell their services to other retailers. I think Walmart are doing this in part down south of the border, and they're actually picking up from consumers' houses and taking them to another consumer as part of a program that we're experimenting with. Thanks for all those contributions. So looking at the next one, ESG in the last mile. I don't want to spend too much time on ESG as a concept. I'm certainly no expert in it, but as I think about many of the surveys that come back from buying preferences, would you as individuals want to trade with brands that have sustainability as top of mind, purpose-based brands? And the expression is consumers that keep coming back and asking for more transparency, more positive environmental impact. And I think Valerie may have picked up the need for service in, for instance, in Ontario or Quebec, all the underserved communities, making sure they have the same access to the services we may do in the big towns, and more equity and diversity. But at the end of the day, consumers still want their stuff and they want it today. As an industry, I think we've got some interesting views about what consumers would like to have, and then we look at their actual requirements as they demonstrate them, as they use Prime Day and other promotions that other retailers have. So the questions I'd like to ask, in terms of things like next day and same day, given that this is a burdened, accelerating trend, how have you been able to do this with reducing greenhouse gas and any side effects of pollution? And how are you addressing your ESG obligations specifically within last mile as opposed to the wider business environment? And how are you engaging with you and your clients, with customers or consumers, to offer much greener options such as delayed delivery?
So in terms of competing, for us, we've really been on this journey since 2004, when we originally made serious investments around our hybrid electric vehicles. From there, it's overall been a continuous improvement program. I think the opportunity when it comes to ESG is right now, with fuel prices rising, diversifying our fleet with more vehicles. The opportunity is certainly in front of us as we speak. We just procured 95 more vehicles to add to our fleet over the last couple of weeks. And then I think we got to be very situational when it comes to ESG. For example, our mayor here in Montreal is very focused on the environment. Just a few streets away from here in St. Catherine, McGill University, you can deliver packages like we once did in the past. So finding different means and alternatives of how we're delivering to those areas, potentially with e-cargo bikes that are more efficient, but yet don't require the same type of capital, is all different alternatives that we're looking at. So it's been a continuous improvement journey for us, no question. In terms of your question on how we're engaging customers, we're certainly sharing with our customers where we have electrification solutions, e-bikes, electric vehicles, where we're providing carbon reporting back to our customers, and really having them engage as part of the process, sending them notifications on when they're planning to receive their parcels and communicating with them so they're home and we avoid the second attempt delivery that has a huge impact on the environment. So those are a couple of things we're doing, Gary.
Thank you.
I think ESG, I wouldn't say it's an obligation. I would actually say it's the right way to do business today. Consumers are very much focused on the environment, of course, as we all should be. So there's a few things. So there's the environment piece, and then I'll talk about making sure that the serving the communities, so the actual humanity aspect of it. So the first one on gas emissions, we actually are introducing a carbon calculator, so a way to be able to offset the carbon emissions of a package, both from a commercial perspective, so for retailers to be able to offset those emissions, but also, and it's not live yet, we're working on it right now, but for the consumer to be able to offset. And we've done some research, and consumers are showing additional interest in making sure that their purchases are not harming the environment, and that there's a way to counteract that. And they're, a few years back, they cared, but they weren't willing to pay. Recent research shows that they're willing to pay a nominal fee to be able to offset those carbon emissions. So of course, we are testing a lot of programs around, of course, green vehicles, which is a no-brainer, the cargo bikes and so on. Like, it's been in the works for quite some time. But the latest investment actually that we did was a carbon neutral plant. So the latest plant that went live in Toronto that just opened is actually fully self-sustainable and carbon neutral. It's a huge investment. It was a big decision a few years back. It does require additional investment, but again, it's the right thing to do. Now on to the more human aspect of things. So the underserved communities, how do we make sure that we give that outreach to the northern communities, the remote communities? So we have a mandate and a desire to serve all those communities every single day. So there's some places, actually, believe it or not, we still deliver packages in a canoe. And I wish I was kidding. I'm not. The cost of serving those communities sometimes can be high, but the value that these items actually bring to them is next to none, where they don't have access to the type of services that we have here. So how do we make sure that we remain cost effective in serving those communities, and also bring services that are a little bit outside of the traditional way? And we're testing right now financial services in the northern communities in areas that are not served by banks, that are higher risk potentially, for those where we can offer low-cost loans as opposed to the high-interest loan sharks that are currently kind of tapping into those communities. So how do we make sure that we serve them in the best way possible, sometimes even stepping a little bit outside of our comfort zone to best support them?
Fun fact, American Express started off as a logistics company. So headed down the
You're going to say a loan shark.
Well, pretty much. I think I'd just like to analogize something here. If we didn't have the gas stations as prevalently and as spread out as they are, gas vehicles would not be as economical for us either. So the infrastructure is key. Just touching on using electric vehicles, we've definitely put that on as a top priority. The new network that we have is basically a network of smart couriers and hubs. Our concept is to try and utilize our numerous hubs as battery interchange, battery changing facilities or charging facilities to accommodate long haul electric vehicle runs, because one of the challenges we're seeing right now is long haul across province does not quite work for electric vehicles. Last mile urban environment, all that is great. So that's something that we're looking at. Obviously with our tech routing, we've added a gauge for carbon emissions as well, so we could kind of gauge on which type of vehicle it is and how much of a load that they're carrying to know what the carbon footprint there is on that package. Reporting that back to the consumers, to Val's point, I think it goes a long way. There's increased sensitivity across the board for better environment, better future for our kids, and all of that. So we're definitely working closely with our clients. They've got mandates to reduce carbon emissions, in 50, 60, 70% in the next 2 to 3 years. So we're right there alongside with them, trying to source the right vehicle types, trying to put down the right infrastructure and use ample technology to connect all the dots.
Moving on to attracting and retaining staff. So a particular issue in the last mile, but I think it has much wider appeal for any operation involving warehousing, transportation, and in retail store working. So the pandemic drove classification of workers between those who are deemed essential and those which were deemed non-essential and often ended up working from home. The pandemic gave rise to a narrative around a great resignation. It's never been clear to me as to what that actually means, but I think that it describes two trends. One is the people approaching retirement age actually choosing to retire and not return to work because of the fear perhaps of COVID, but also a transitory stage, as Royce alluded to within food service, of their industry being open, shut, multiple times, and then deciding that they needed to go somewhere else to maintain stability of earnings. That we're in a situation where we have incredibly high, certainly within retail, open vacancies and exceptionally low unemployment figures that are being reported. So companies are still working through after 2 years, and I think they're still going to continue to work for some time on things around hybrid. Some firms said, we're never going to come back to the office, we're going to work virtually, and some of those are changing their mind as time goes on. They're faced with higher terms and conditions to attract people. In the UK, there's a current trial going on for a 4-day week. So if you believe you can do your work in 4 days, we'll pay you for 5 days, but you can have a day off. It's a government-sponsored scheme. And there's increase in union action, and I've seen things within the grocery trade, and delayed collective agreements. Now, I think most of us probably are aware of the sensitivity around the Los Angeles and Long Bay collective agreement being negotiated and hopefully completed by the 1st of July. I don't think that's even off the ground, and I don't think there's much motivation to settle very quickly. So the questions that I have, and as I say, that probably of more general appeal to everybody in the room who's involved with staffing their operations, is what measures are being put in place to attract staff? And I've been in a number of conversations where the emphasis is about attracting staff. And when I raise the question, well, okay, you're attracting it, great. What about retaining staff? So what are the measures that perhaps are appropriate in that area? And one of the great narratives that I keep seeing is that people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. So I just wonder, a subset of this great resignation, this imbalance in the employment situation, is there something to be said about strong, transparent and empowering leadership that will help drive much more positive outcomes when it comes to retention? So who wants to go first on this? This is a big one.
I think every business is facing employee challenges, resource challenge, the right talent as well. So it's one thing to have people, but you need to make sure you have the right type of talent in the right type of position. It's been a big challenge. We have been challenged, of course, through the pandemic with a portion of the workforce working from home, a portion still needing to be out in the field facing things every day. So how do you make sure that you retain the talent that you have? And you touched on a union. I mean, there's already probably one of the strongest unions in Canada within Canada Post. So we're already there for sure, but it's how you treat your employees. So how do you make sure that they're properly compensated? How do you make sure that they have health benefits, that they have a pension, that they have vacation days? Like, it's not, especially in the courier industry, it's not something that's available everywhere. So how do you make sure that you offer more than just a job and a salary? And like, how do you make sure that people feel like they also matter at the end of the day, and that they're part of the objectives of the business, and that they are creating their own reward at the end of the day? How do you compensate based on results that they're achieving? And to your point, how do you make sure that the leadership also supports the employees and truly cares. So I think we've really seen a shift as well through the pandemic, a shift in the mix of home as well as work life. How do you make sure that you have a work-life balance, and people's mental health is a true priority for Canada, not just physical health. Like, it was a taboo subject that nobody really talked about until a few years ago, when it's a very real thing and something that we've really seen more and more throughout the pandemic. So as a leader of the corporation, how do you actually not just say that you care about people's health and mental health, but actually take it into action? Don't just say that, oh, you need to have a work-life balance. Make sure that they can do their work within the allocated time, and that they do have that downtime to be able to recharge their batteries. It's better to have an employee that's healthy, both physically and mentally, who will be high performing on the job, than to have someone that's run down, that will stop caring, that will make errors, that will not be like, they'll be like, I call it presenteeism. They'll show up, but they won't actually be productive. So how does a company actually support that? And it's not through added workload. And it's not just through pay. It's through make sure that they actually have time with the family, and finding the right balance between the mix of, again, being at home all the time, potentially working from home, and not having that divide and that separator. So, and it's not just through a mental health webinar. I'm not sure how many of you have seen that TikTok. It was hilarious. If you haven't, Google it, because it was so accurate. Just make sure that you actually care about your team, and that you manage the workload, and also do it for yourself. So it's one thing to do it for everybody else. And so be kind to yourself too, and make sure that you treat yourself the way that you treat others. So be respectful of your own time, be respectful of your own family, and do some and I'm going off a tangent here, but do a bit of self-reflection on yourself as well, to make sure that you have the right balance at the end of the day, so that you stay in the right set of mind.
Maybe I'll add a few points to that. Nicely said, Valerie. And when it comes to retention, can't obviously all offer pension plans to our employees and retain them. Like, there's got to be lots of creativity out there. One of the notions that we're seeing coming up a lot is this notion of career advancement at all levels in the organization. It's coming up more than we've seen in the past. Maybe a quick example to share with the group this morning. A lot of our drivers, a lot of our P&D vehicle drivers want to get promoted either into a unit manager position, or specifically around line haul driving, which we've seen a shortage in the industry over the last couple of weeks. So it's about us as employers to facilitate that type of specific development plans catered down to the actual employee. What we do at Purolator to facilitate the drivers is we pay for their training, we pay for their time off. We partner with local colleges, and we get to an objective where we have certified drivers. And we try to bring that back into our business model. There has been line haul shortages at Purolator across the industry over the last couple of years. So not only do we retain the employee, we also solve for lots of challenges that we're seeing in the industry. So really building out caring, meaningful retention plans with our people, and development plans is a key way of how we're doing it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'd echo both Val and Fab on this. Personally, I've seen over the past 10 to 12 years a bit of a shift in overall workforce mindset. I think in the past 2 years is a bit unprecedented, because the new workforce that we're seeing have not seen a day without a smartphone. A lot of them rely on algorithms and social media to be guided on where to go, what to do. Maybe not to that degree, but that's the new world that we're in. And I do see an evolution in sort of how to reward them is changing from, let's say, a pension plan to NFTs or something along those lines, something that's evolutionary and adapting to where that young mindset is. One of the things, again, I'll echo, is definitely an incentive or a graduation program that all staff need. We build out a gig network. So I look at it in two different perspectives. We've obviously got our own team, and then we've got the entire workforce that's on the road delivering packages. We try to put in gauges, rulers, and metrics on gauging on their satisfaction, compensation, performance, things of that nature. Report that back to them. So I think that is the traditional form of an employer having a conversation with the employee, just having a simple conversation to try and understand, are things at their optimal level, or is there something else that could be done here? So we're attempting to do that from a technology standpoint with the larger group. The more personal team members, the more closer to the leadership team, we definitely take time out to have one-on-one conversations to try and understand, because one thing we know is that we will need to evolve as the staff and the employees and your entire network. Their sentiments tend to evolve. There's new expectations in the market when it comes to pension plans or benefits and group benefits. So how do we unlock those? Do we unlock those right off the bat, or do we put the right incentives in place, not simply by increasing the workload to distract them, but to have that conversation, make sure we're actually ticking the goal boxes that they've set for themselves. So we have that conversation. Everyone from a student that wants to try out to be a Joey to everybody, our senior engineers as well, just to understand what their goals are, short-term, long-term, and if it's a fit, we'll do our best to make that happen, either contractually or through an app.
A survey that was done shortly after the end of the Great Recession, I asked them what was their greatest fear, and they said, losing my job. And then I asked other questions to tease out, did they like their job? And 67% of them came back and said they absolutely hated their job. And I put this in context of what I heard here. So, the conclusion was most people, the greatest fear was losing the job they hated. I hope that what we've learned through the pandemic, the schemes that we shared today, and will continue to develop, will have a different outcome to that same survey, that people are more engaged in the work. We need them more engaged and actually enjoy coming to work to do a good day's work and be part of a wider team, a wider sense of purpose. So I'm going to now open it to questions and answers.
There are a couple of questions that have come in from the virtual feed. So here's the first one. What specific topics or skills can post-secondary institutions focus on to better prepare students to succeed in the current workplace reality? What are the key success factors for our graduates to thrive in Canada's logistics industry?
Maybe I'll start with the net neutrality question in terms of emissions. Yeah, so gas emissions, Purolator is fully committing to the notion of net neutrality by 2050. We're about to launch our goals for gas emissions with zero emissions by 2030, and from there we're going to be communicating with the broader public in terms of backward quantifiables on how we're going to reach our goals in 2030 and 2050. Concerning the question I heard about colleges, it's been a big evolution. When I was studying commerce many years ago, there was no sales programs. I'm leading a sales organization today. Now we see universities with sales programs, for example. Supply chain wasn't part of the map many years ago, and we've seen that evolve in many community colleges and universities. So those are a few examples.
Right. We also have a carbon neutral program, very similar to Purolator's, but some around 2030, and some of the details can be found actually. I believe they can now be found online. We just launched them a few months ago. So in terms of what colleges I think should help or maybe add on a little bit more is around leadership and presence. So I think that the new generation is very tied to technology, tied to their phone, social interaction, especially now, they've been actually mandated not to socialize for the last 2-3 years with the pandemic, which is key development years in somebody's career. So how do you make sure that we teach this generation how to be a leader, how to be present in a conversation and not staring at your phone every 2 seconds? A lot of these people have a lot of ambitions. They want to make a difference, but in order to make a difference, you actually need to lead people and have people wanting to work with you and for you. So that would be the course I would teach if I could.
We've definitely got a zero emissions program as well. We've actually offered up a package to all of our clients based on their mandates. So a lot of them are 20 to 30 years out. We're actually forecasting our entire fleet will be electric in a couple of years. Aside from the long haul, that's something we're still working on. in terms of colleges, that's very interesting. I think shadowing and mentoring on the ground and then trying to work out what needs to happen tomorrow is absolute, or not, well, yeah, trying to work out which gauges and reports need to happen in order for a better tomorrow is something that we don't always see in classic curriculums and in academia, which is mentorship and shadowing somebody that's gone through the career path that that individual is trying to pursue or even exploring. One of the things is they're always changing as well. So wherever we are today, 5 to 6 years from now, they're the same role maybe in 2 or 3 different roles now, or 2 or 3 roles get consolidated into one. So it's important to understand, in my view, the functions and the key sensitivities around what's going to be better in the future for that individual. So shadowing and mentoring is what I would say.
Jeff Ashcroft from DLT Labs. The question I had, since you're all service providers to e-commerce brands, what type of new service challenges and demands have you been seeing from your e-commerce brand customers?
I think one of the biggest challenge that continues to grow is actually going to be on returns. So reverse logistics and returns. It is actually exponentially growing. And again, customer expectations are shifting drastically. There's new models that are being tested around that, but how do we make sure that we support that reverse logistics in a cost-effective way? So I think that will be one of the biggest challenge, because the shipping, you've just paid for shipping to get it to your consumer, and now they expect you to also pay the shipping to get it back to you. You need to make sure the product is still potentially in good conditions. There's also that ESG component so that it doesn't end up in a landfill. That whole reverse logistics is something that we're investing significantly on, that we have invested over the years, but I think that'll be one of the biggest challenges that merchants are going to face in the coming years.
For us, I would say one of the biggest challenges we've been seeing is there's a lot of different sectors and verticals going to the home today and deliver from an e-commerce perspective. So not only are we driving or planning on driving e-commerce solutions, but vertical specific capabilities as well. So for example, home healthcare is a growing market servicing the mobile patient, for example, not only delivering with e-commerce capabilities, but temperature control. So sort of catering your solutions from both an e-commerce perspective and at the vertical specific capability is one of our key challenges that we're working through. And to Valerie's point about returns, we think returns is a great opportunity overall. For many carriers in the room, we're driving lots, coincidence of stops, more pieces to existing stops or one DC. But we're really working with our customers on this notion of speed, where we're trying to return the item, next day into our customers' DC, into our inventory systems, back on their transactional website, so that they're selling that item back in a day with short seasons at the original price where it was sold. So we're generating a loss into a gain are some of the challenges we're working through.
And consolidation is key.
Yeah.
Could I think there's a question over here, and we've got just a few minutes left. Just for the people on the virtual, I think the question is, with the blend of the workforce being old and new, and some of the programs that companies are putting in place may actually have a preference to older people, younger people, and the need for younger people to have stuff now, because that's the world they live in. They're not used to queuing or anything, they want it now. How do these things get reconciled?
Yeah, for sure. A quick thought for your question. What I think I said is we can't fully rely on pension plans, because maybe ours is not as competitive as my peer next to me. Research is showing it, and we're hearing it from our employees, this notion of career advancement. And across the organization, whether we actually retain an employee or there's a few of our teammates who have left recently with the resignation, it has been with the feedback of, I didn't get a position I was looking for. So I think the biggest learning for us is about caring about our teammates, really understanding their personal and professional goals, and genuinely building a development plan so that we could accomplish much of their development aspirations. And I think if you do that with a lot of authenticity and really invest in the employee, regardless of the size of the business, you're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. I do think that the bridging between the old and new, as you're saying, basically is finding what is synonymous with a pension plan that would work for the previous employers, and how can we incentivize the younger workforce coming in. In my honest opinion, because of the resources now available online, everybody has the autonomy to, operate their own service offering. So having a sense of ownership goes a long way, I think, in that aspect. And the initial gratification would come from sort of what that graduation plan looks like. A sense of accomplishment goes a long way too. So, if the daily tasks or the weekly tasks are actually developing and you're getting to the peak, I think the staff that will definitely resonate. Having the right type of plan in place. I guess the language and the terminology you use is really the only variable, depending on, whether it's old or new, but it should all still, it's either going to be, dollars or Bitcoin, if you look at it that way.
I kind of wrote down my question because it's a little bit loaded. It's coming back to retaining your employees, and it's focused more on your administrative personnel and your middle management. I guess I'm trying to understand what you guys are doing with regard to the new homework philosophy for these people. Not the traditional homework where students hate their homework, but this is more encouraging more and more middle management to do homework. In the venue regarding fuel prices, brick and mortar, cell work, a new office, phone hookup to office stations, are you guys seeing more and more an obligation in that area as opposed to trying to just keep people into a brick and mortar environment?
So if I can just summarize the question, I think you're saying in the transition to more work from home, are people saying, well, although I'm saving all this stuff over here, I forget about that, but my costs in my home to actually support myself from home are starting to increase. Are companies facing claims for more expenses?
More than that, are you actually maybe looking into seed work into that area yourselves?
Definitely. So I'm actually part of the committee that's leading the return to office for Canada Post as a whole, which has been very challenging, and we still don't have the answer, by the way. So we still have a lot of questions. One of the ways that we did this actually is we surveyed our people. So we actually did workshop sessions to see, what do you want? Like, what's your ideal? So we involved them in some of the decisions that we're doing. And the leadership has been very supportive in that. We've obviously come to a conclusion, I think, as most, that at a minimum, a hybrid model is something that employees are looking for, both on retention and even acquisition. It is now a key question. So I've had to hire 3 team members over the last 6 months. And as part of the questions to even consider the position is there a possibility for me to work either completely remotely or in a hybrid model? So no longer will we see at Canada Post anyways, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 back in the office. So it is a new reality. Now, how do you adapt to that, both physically and like in office as well as remote? So there's a lot of variables. There is obviously a need for people to get properly equipped at home with the right technology. And often, companies like Canada Post need to offer some support in getting that set up at home. But then how do you also set up the office, like a hoteling type space where you may not have a reserved desk? You may be able to reduce your footprint of the in-office, but you still encourage people to go in. And how do you make it not a burden for people to go in the office? How is it exciting now to see people again, so that you're not coming back to that old environment that you were in before? So definitely a trial and error, I think, for most businesses. I think it'll take some time. We went from one extreme to the other, and it needs to be part of the package, especially in the newer generation, for sure.
One of the, I wouldn't say criticisms I heard of many people returning to the office were they went back to the office and spent all day on Zoom. If you're having policies, think them through carefully and make sure that they're cogent and kind of cohesive and they hang together. I think I'm going to ask Pina to return to the stage and hand over.
Thank you very much. I wasn't prepared to say this, but a lot of the comments around career development to me sparks a whole conversation about companies creating an employee value proposition. And we touched on it, sort of the remote from home, the career advancement, professional development. Of course, CITT, that's what we do, professional development. And knowing and reading about these trends over the last couple of years, we actually have developed an endorsed logistics employer program where we work with companies to actually help retain, attract their talent and develop their talent. I thought this was a fantastic session. And now we're heading into our 30-minute coffee and networking break. I'd encourage you to also take the opportunity to connect with your fellow attendees, as well as all of our exhibitors who are actually in the room where the coffee break is actually taking place.
Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your team. You can connect with me via the website retail.ca and go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn by typing linkedin.com/in/last-mile. Look forward to hearing from you and playing an active part with your supply chain and your business's transformation as you start to act boldly, think big, scale, adapt, and win.